And welcome back to the show, recording at Studio 392 in Chandler, Arizona. It's a dark and stormy night here, so hold on to your hats if you're in this area. But so if you're an addict in recovery, I hope you'll find this podcast useful. You know, whether your addiction was, shooting heroin, drinking mimosas at the golf club, or just sitting at home with a case of Budweiser, the solution is all the same. So let's get busy living in the solution. So tonight's guest is a guy I've known for a long time, probably almost 20 years. And he lives out on the East Coast. So we're doing this by Zoom. And he agreed to talk about his martial arts activities that he's been doing for some time now. And he says this has helped him in his recovery as well. So I thought that'd be interesting to talk about. That's kind of what we do on the shows. We talk about things that people are doing, in addition to 12-step meetings, things that address their physical recovery, their emotional recovery, their spiritual recovery, all these kind of things that, we work on in recovery. So I'm really happy to have with me here tonight my good friend John V. Welcome to the show, John. How you doing?
Good. Hey, thanks for having me on, Mike. I appreciate it.
You bet, man. So how's life treating you lately? Have you been staying at home? Are you back to work? What's been going on there?
So I've been teleworking starting in March 14th or so. We went to telework, and I actually have been working more from home than probably longer days, and it seems like I've been busier throughout the day working from home than being at work, and it's interesting. It's really like turned my life upside down, because at the same time I had to stop doing my martial arts, which I was doing 7 days a week essentially.
Because the studio was closed?
Yeah, we couldn't, obviously we can't get back together. I train in a couple of different places, and all of them closed down, so we can't get together, and we can't touch each other. We can't train with each other. So that kind of activity just sort of got put on hold.
Yeah. So,
but the good news is I'm like making way more meetings. I was averaging 4 meetings a week before. My home group meets 7 nights a week, but I go Tuesdays, Thursdays, and then Saturdays and Sundays, like before COVID. And then once COVID kicked in, I actually stood up a meeting over Google Hangouts, and that meets 7 nights a week. So I've been going 7 nights a week to that, and then we have some in-person meetings at a park, and I typically go 4 or 5 times to the in-person meetings. So I'm making 11, 12 meetings a week now. So that's good. COVID's been good for my recovery in one way.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So, and that's been going on for what, like 2 months now, huh? At least
three.
Yeah. So the Washington, D.C. area, like, I really haven't heard much in the news about, how hard Washington, D.C. has been hit with this. I just haven't heard anything. So compared with the rest of the country, how are you guys doing?
So I grew up in New York City, and thankfully we're not doing anything. It's not, DC is not that kind of city. There's not like 10 million of us all on top of each other. So we haven't gotten it that bad. I live over on the Virginia side. There's also the Maryland side, and there's the city itself. So for people who aren't familiar with DC, DC's more people live in the suburbs of DC, like around the city, than they live in the city proper. And as expected, the highest density of infections and deaths are close to the city where populations are more packed in. But it's been nothing like New York. It hasn't been like that level of deaths. So I think Virginia's got a little over 1,000 dead, maybe like 1,400. Maryland's got a little over 2,000, I think. And the district itself maybe has 250, 300 dead. Now we are on the, our curve is still going up, particularly in Maryland. on the Maryland side. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But like everybody else, we're hoping that the warm weather and the sunshine will just kill it off, and we'll be able to get back to normal sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Right. So, well, let's get to what we wanted to really talk about. You've been in recovery for, well, I've known you for almost 20 years, and you were sober when I met you. And as far as I know, you've been sober that whole time. So you're up there in years now.
Yeah, my sobriety date is March 16th, 1994. So, it's been a couple of 24s.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, so I got sober initially in North Carolina. I was in the Army, and I worked a really strong program like my first 10, 12 years. So I got sober in a great home group on a military installation in North Carolina. We had 3 meetings a week there, and then I got sent overseas. I had like maybe like 2.5, 3 years sober when I got overseas, and I was like the old guy in the meeting. I had like more sobriety than anybody else. There's a lot of guys coming straight out of treatment, so I got to work with a lot of newcomers up there. And then I came back here. Came back to the DC area from overseas. Again, I was living on a military installation, which is right next to a homeless shelter. And me and this old guy were the two, sort of like cornerstones of this meeting. And he would go pick up the guys at the homeless shelter and bring them over. And that was, really great. But what happened after that is when I got out of the military, left active duty, my new home group, I moved away. My new home group was like a noon meeting, and so I wasn't working with as many newcomers. And so that sort of like dropped off. And then I took another job, and I couldn't go to my home group anymore. I didn't get a new home group. And I entered this phase of my life where I spent like the better part of a decade not having a proper home group, not really talking to a whole lot of other people in recovery. And, I would maybe make one meeting a month if I was lucky. It was more like one meeting every other month. And I would kind of like just pop in randomly in like different groups. One of the great things about the DC area, I don't know what it's like out there in Phoenix, but here there's like, you can't spit without hitting a meeting. There's literally meetings from like 7 a.m. until like, 11 o'clock at night. They're all over the place. I mean, we're very fortunate to have them. So I would just like float around and pop into random meetings. People in the community didn't really get to know me. I didn't get to know them. So like, I kind of like drifted away a little bit. And what happened is I was enjoying, the fruits of sobriety. I was like 12, 14 years sober. I had built a nice career. Everything was going really well. When I just started to like drift off, and
What year was that? What year was that, Rob?
I don't even know off the top of my head, but I'll probably say in the, like roughly like around 2005,
Okay.
something like that, 2006, somewhere in there, I started to drift away.
So that was about the time that I left the area. But
Yeah,
we weren't really in close contact those last couple of years anyway, because I was drifting off myself.
You were doing your own thing. But yeah, it was around probably a little after you left, or you stopped. Probably a little after you left is probably when I really drifted off. So anyway, the good news is I didn't relapse, and only but for the grace of God did I not relapse, because lots of other people who did what I did ended up going out. I never considered myself like no longer a member. I considered myself a member. I just was not working a strong program. I never said, screw you, AA, I'm not doing this anymore. Like I don't need the 12 steps. I just wasn't working a strong program with all the components. And it, for a bit I made it. And then one of the things that happened is I retired from the reserve component of the military. So all of us, and my kids were a little older. And so all of a sudden I had some extra time that I didn't have before. And instead of like going to meetings, starting to work a strong program again, now that I had this extra time and space, I did what I kind of like always wanted to do from the time I was a kid, which was get into martial arts, And
So you had like thought about that from when you were in elementary school, or what junior high? When was that? You used to have these fantasies.
Yeah, well, I've always been into it, right? So like when I was a little kid in New York City, um, I was a latchkey kid, like a lot of other people in the mid '70s, and the city was just nuts back then. But I used to go to Times Square to like 42nd Street, and they had these like you'd pay like $2, and you could see 3 kung fu movies, And I was like this little kid by myself, like going into these movie theaters. I mean, it's amazing that I didn't get like abducted or like molested or something, because that stuff happened. But like I would go sit in these movie theaters for like
Maybe you've
6
repressed
hours.
those memories, John. Do we need
Man,
to?
that's entirely possible, brother.
Yeah.
I might need like deep regression analysis,
Hypnosis.
Yeah. But yeah, so I would go sit in these movie theaters and I love this kung fu stuff. And at one point, like I was, I'd gotten to be kind of tubby, because I was just sitting in an apartment, like I wasn't getting any exercise and there was nothing to, there wasn't really an opportunity for me to go run around in the city. I was like in Manhattan, and I was begging my mom to let me, learn martial arts. And so, my parents were immigrants. They were like, they couldn't really figure out, what it was. So she signed me up for a judo class at the YMCA, New York City YMCA. And I loved it, I did judo for, I don't know, like 6 months, 9 months, something like that, as I was probably like 11 or 12, but I really loved it. And it was different because, when you go to you watch the kung fu movies, there's all this like jumping around and kicking and like, leaping and twirling and stuff. And judo's not like that at all. Judo's like, it's like wrestling and clothes. You're like throwing the other guy down on the ground. But I took to it right away. I really liked it. It's very different than anything I'd seen in the movies, but I loved the uniform and the belt and all that stuff. And but we were poor, and it was very difficult for my parents to get me there. So, and it didn't cost a lot of money, but it cost more than we could really swing regularly at the time. So I did like 6 or 9 months of that, and then we ended up not doing it, and I moved out to we moved out of the city to a New York suburb out on Long Island. Then I kept wanting to do like combative style stuff, so like I wrestled for a little bit. But by the time I started wrestling in school, I'd already started smoking cigarettes and drinking alcohol. And, it just didn't, it's very difficult to be a competitive wrestler when you like smoking and drinking, because it's a very hard sport and you got to train really hard. And I was in a very competitive team. And,
so you kind of chose the alcohol and the smoking over the wrestling, basically.
I did.
Yeah.
And I didn't have the discipline. My character defects were really just starting to like flower, like they were starting to bloom right around that time. And so I didn't stick with the wrestling. And then I ended up graduated from high school. I went to college. And then after college, I moved back in with my dad. My mom had passed away, and I moved back in with my dad, and I took up judo again for a bit. And it was a great club. It was a great club. Very fortunate to have this club with a Japanese guy, like off the boat Japanese guy who had come up in Japan at the World Judo headquarters, and I had this awesome opportunity. But again, I was in the throes of my disease, and I just didn't stick with it. It was too hard, to like go in there and train hard, So I did it for a few months and then, stopped. So ended up joining the military. Obviously military, you do a lot of physical stuff, and I always like that. I'll talk about violence too, right? Like violence is a big part of my story.
You like to kick ass, kind of. That's felt good. You had some anger going on. It sounds like.
I did, man. I did. So I always like to fight, but it was and for no reason, and especially the neighborhood that I moved to on Long Island was kind of there was always the opportunity for violence there. Those kids like to fight, and so I think. So let me share this, like my first really violent like episode. So I was like in 4th grade. I was new in America, right? Like new, like immigrant kid, like new to the United States. And and these two girls started picking on me in the schoolyard, like in this inner city New York City school. And I was just like, I was baffled. I just didn't know. I was like, I didn't know them. And like, for some reason, they just like became like turned on me and sort of like picking at me. And like, they had me cornered in this corner, like literally like in this corner of this schoolyard. And they were like kicking me in the shins. And I went into this blind rage. Like I was wearing a belt. I like took off my belt and like whipped one of them with the belt buckle and like cut her face open with it. And then the other one started screaming, and I chased her across the schoolyard, like whipping her with my belt. I flew into this like insane rage, and obviously like the teachers came and got me, and whatever, they pulled me away, and but nobody ever messed with me in that elementary school again.
That was
And
elementary school.
this was in fourth grade.
Wow.
This was in fourth grade.
Yeah, that's
And so
pretty hard stuff for fourth grade.
And so what happened to me is I think I sort of like realized, like, I can just go berserk, and people will leave me alone, because I think I was afraid. I didn't know how to handle these situations, and when I got to the suburbs, I kind of like, I didn't even wait for somebody to like do something to me. I just like started like assaulting people, like just I, and
Just to kind of have that image, that reputation, so no one would mess with you.
Yeah, exactly. Like preemptive, like lunatic, So like, pretty soon, like everybody's like, oh, that guy's a lunatic, leave him alone, and like they gave me a wide berth, and I sort of like wallowed in that reputation. I liked it, so, typical kind of like fights. I went to this college with like very low testosterone college. Like it was formerly an all girls school. Like it was a small school, like fully like a quarter to half the guys there were gay, and I was just like, I was running around just like basically like, I was drunk all the time.
You're like this Neanderthal among the civilized folk.
Exactly. I was like, this caveman. Exactly. And but what happened after my mom died as soon as I graduated from college. Unexpectedly, she just dropped dead. And I'd never given much thought to God before, but like all of a sudden I was just like really angry at God. I didn't even know if God existed. I didn't know if I believed in God, but like I got so angry. And my drinking and drug use, like became very different. Like I was so angry so much of the time that I would get just wasted, and I was going into New York City. I would just get wasted and just have lots of fights, just randomly attacking people. I got my ass beat like a lot, because like most of the time I was like, I could barely stand up. I was like blackout drunk, like attacking random people on the street, and they, just beat the hell out of me a lot of times, and it's only by the grace of God. One night I like went and attacked a bunch of drug dealers. Like this was in the early 90s. Crack was all over the place, like in New York, and there's like every corner had a dealer in the neighborhood that I was in. And I was just like running up to each of these dealers, just like punching them, like chasing them down the street. And I was like, only by the grace of God did they not shoot me or stab me or something.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know why they didn't,
They were probably just so shocked they didn't know how to react.
Yeah, like, I mean, but God really watched out for me, because I could have been gunned down at any moment, and I wasn't, So anyway, so while I was in the throes of my disease, like I didn't have the discipline, didn't have the strength of character to stick with like actual martial arts, or a combat sport like wrestling. What I did do was just get drunk and attack people for no reason, like stupidly and randomly, and I'm fortunate I didn't, not only get killed, but I'm lucky that it was a crazy enough time and place that I didn't, I didn't get arrested for that, But when I hit my bottom later on, when I ended up hitting my bottom, like my last like drunken act was, again, like I assaulted a bunch of people at a party, and it had to do with violence. So violence is a big part of my story, but I didn't I didn't get into martial arts because of the violence. I just did something I always wanted to do that I couldn't when I wasn't sober. And then when I had a little bit of time and I was sober, I got into it. Um, and I did a bunch of research, but what it came down to is I found a good school near my house. It was a Korean martial art called Hapkido. I started doing that maybe like 7.5 years ago. Um, and they didn't, my son was 13 at the time, and they didn't take people under 16. So like 6 or 7 months later, I found a Japanese jiu-jitsu place at the YMCA dojo at the YMCA near where I live, and that took kids under 16. So I brought him with me. We signed up together. I started doing that with him, and he did it with me a few years, and then decided he wanted to do it anymore, and I stuck with it.
And you say that was Japanese jiu-jitsu?
Yeah, Japanese jiu-jitsu.
Brazilian
Brazilian
as opposed
jiu-jitsu,
to like Brazilian jiu-jitsu and I don't know what other types, but
right. So just super quick history lesson. Jiu-jitsu was developed in Japan as a way for samurai to fight once their swords were broken or lost on the battlefield. So if samurai had to fight each other, like they fell off their horses or whatever, or like their swords broke and they're like fighting each other on a battlefield, they were always wearing armor. So like punching and kicking didn't really work so well. So they developed this way of fighting that involved a lot of like sweeping and throwing, like knocking the other guy on the ground, and then using like joint locks and chokes. So it was developed in medieval Japan for samurai to use on the battlefield when they lost their weapons or broke their weapons. Once the samurai class was outlawed and they were no longer allowed to practice these arts, some of these samurai started making their living teaching jujitsu to people in Japan, and to regular people, non-warriors, non-samurai. And they got a really bad reputation because a lot of the people who were learning it were criminals, and they would learn these skills so they could like rob people or do whatever it is. So right. Jiu-jitsu got a bad reputation. Okay. But there was one guy named Kano Jigoro who he came from a well-to-do family. He was well-educated. He was sickly as a kid and started training in jiu-jitsu, fell in love with it. He trained in 2 different styles of jiu-jitsu and eventually created a form of jiu-jitsu that he wanted people to use for self-improvement and to sort of like reform the art. And he called it judo. And that's how judo was born. So judo is a sport form of jiu-jitsu. He took this battlefield art that was developed by samurai and made like a sport out of it, and wanted to use it. He was an educator. He wanted to use it as part of school curriculum, and he wanted to use it to help people improve their lives. So at the same time, a little bit before Kano, there was a guy named Sokaku Takeda, who was part of this samurai caste, and he did a different kind of jujitsu called Aiki Jujitsu. Daitoru Aiki Jujitsu was the name of his style of jujitsu, and the Japanese took a lot of Koreans and brought them over like as children and had them as indentured servants or slaves, essentially, after the Japanese occupation of Japan. So one of these Koreans who was brought over to Japan as a child ended up somehow learning Daitoru Aiki Jujitsu from this guy Takeda. The Korean guy claimed that Takeda had actually adopted him. The Takeda family denies this. They're like, we never heard of this guy. We don't know who he is. So that's probably like not true, but the guy was probably a servant in the Takeda household. He was probably Takeda's like demonstration boy or whatever. But he ends up back in Korea with these jujitsu skills, and he starts this art called Hapkido. So judo, Hapkido, and Japanese, they're all types. They're all like offshoots of Japanese jujitsu. which was this battlefield art.
So the
And
Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is then a offshoot of that too?
it
or-
is. So the way it ended up in Brazil is Kano sent some of his top students out into the world to spread judo. And one of the people he sent out was a guy named Maeda, Mitsui Maeda, and who ended up in Brazil. There are a lot of Japanese people in Brazil, and he ended up in Brazil spreading judo, which at the time was called Kano Jiu-Jitsu. So Maeda ends up in Brazil, and he teaches a bunch of Brazilians, but notably he teaches Carlos Gracie, and who goes on to teach his brothers, Helio Gracie, so Helio and Carlos essentially started Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, which is now known as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So it's all kind of related, and the principles behind these arts, basically, they're about like they're about circular movements, and they're about not using force, but getting a feel for the force that your opponent generates, and then going with that force using a circular motion. And so it's not about being, the fastest, the biggest, or the strongest. It's about blending with your opponent and using their own power against them, which sounds like something that everybody says, but it's a little harder to do than it's not. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it,
Sure. So, well, that's interesting history for sure. So, and have you been practicing that Japanese Jiu-Jitsu since then?
So,
or-
like I said, I started with Hapkido 7 years ago,
Oh.
7.5 years ago. I started with Japanese Jiu-Jitsu 7 years ago. And then a few years, maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, I started playing judo as well. So
Okay.
I started playing judo and at the same time doing Japanese swordsmanship. So I was doing and the Japanese jiu-jitsu I do and the judo are complementary. Like some of the techniques are similar. The biggest difference is that in judo there's competition, and like you're fighting against resisting opponents. Whereas in the Japanese jiu-jitsu style that I practice, the opponents don't really resist. Like
so
you
you're
throw
still
a punch.
practicing both those disciplines or both those styles, right?
I'm still doing Hapkido and Japanese jiu-jitsu. I got hurt in a tournament playing judo. A guy picked me up, and we fell down together. I ended up landing on my elbow, and I blew out my shoulder. So I had to get my shoulder completely reconstructed, and that kind of ended my judo career. My surgeon said that if I have the same injury, he's not going to be able to fix my arm, so I won't be able to use my left arm again. It was a fluke accident.
Yeah.
It happens. So
Sure.
I think I'm done with judo. But I recently started right before COVID came. Like I found a school that does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The instructor is Romanian, which that's my ethnic background. I'm a Romanian, so it's great. I found a Romanian guy who teaches Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he's also does judo. So he's a great guy, and I just started studying with him. I just started learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu when COVID came. So
Right.
I'm hoping he's going to start back up in a couple of weeks.
Right. So I imagine all this training has improved you. Well, it's improved you physically. I'm sure it's kept you in shape. Right. So, what about I guess, the mental and the spiritual aspects? Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you see in a lot of ads for martial arts stuff, and mind, body, spirit, mind, body, spirit. That's like a mantra that you get in a lot of martial arts marketing, and a lot of martial arts do a very good job at uniting those things. Pretty much all of them, really. It doesn't matter if you're doing something that's very hard, like Muay Thai. I mean like a hard style martial art where you're punching and kicking bags and other people, and they're punching and kicking you. Or if you're doing something very gentle and flowing, like Aikido, or some styles of kung fu where you're just dancing around a lot. All of it like get you in touch with your body, and the discipline of having to learn things, the martial arts approach of having to learn things a certain way and not just doing whatever you want, but doing things a certain way, um, causes you to focus, and it causes this connection between your mind and your body, and the discipline that's required forges your spirit as well.
Right. So disciplining the mind. So I think, in addiction, it seems like we lose control of the mind to a degree, right? Like the mind's telling us to do things and we're going along for some reason, we see where there's
Yeah,
the lack of control was our dilemma, so, and I guess the big part of that is just lack of controlling the mind. So I'm guessing like the focus and the discipline of the martial arts is helping you to rewire and gain better control of the mind as well, right?
yeah, for sure. But balance is, like with most addicts, balance is difficult for me.
Yeah.
And what happened when I drifted away from the program, for that period of time is I really got out of balance. I was focusing so much on being a dad and being a worker and building a career, that I wasn't taking care of myself spiritually in the way that I needed to, or physically, and I was working really long hours. I wasn't exercising at all, um, and I was letting myself get stressed out, and I didn't. I lost my solid connection with my higher power. I mean, things just, I got out of balance because I was focusing on other things. And I remember, my wife and my kids like asking me to exercise, and I was like, well, I don't have time for that. You don't understand what it's like,
Yeah, that
but
hectic DC lifestyle, it's kind of a rat race, right?
it is a rat race, brother. It is.
Yeah.
Um, but once I started the martial arts, then I definitely, um, it really helped me get back in balance, right? Like uh, it helped me get physically more fit and more in tune with my physical self, for sure. Um, and the focus that's required, the Korean martial art in particular, is really like you have to memorize an insane amount of things. And I have like, I'm very fortunate. I study with this guy, who's been teaching since 1976. He's really old school Korean dude, like off the boat Korean dude. Still has like a really thick accent. His English is not the strongest, but he's a 70-plus-year-old, and he's just a badass. He's just like this badass, muscular old Korean dude, like master of Hapkido, Taekwondo, and Kung Fu. His grandmother like hid in a monastery and learned kung fu from the monks, because the Japanese were coming and she had to run away. It's this whole like crazy, like awesome thing. And studying with him is a real privilege. It's a real privilege. But the approach to that art, it's all about memorization. There's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different techniques that you have to memorize in order. And when you're in there, he just pushes you like relentlessly to like remember things. Like you never get a moment to breathe. Like you step onto that mat. And what I would do is I would go in after work before I go home. So like I go grab my uniform, go do that, and it helped me reset every day. Just like meetings do for me now. But I was using these things instead of meetings, and they were great for me. They were great for me mentally and great for me physically. But I'll tell you, like I'm an alcoholic. I have an addict's mind and an addict's personality, and I suffer from a spiritual disease. And what I wasn't getting, I was getting united mind, body, spirit stuff, but I wasn't getting what I needed for my spiritual life. Like my spiritual life, was not getting what I needed. It wasn't helping me connect with my higher power. So sure, like I was meditating as part of my practice. I was doing these breathing exercises, all this stuff. I was definitely more mindful, but it was not helping with my recovery, um, not hurting my recovery, but it's not a replacement for it. It's not a replacement for it. And,
Right. And I think of a lot of people try that. I, fall along that, into that trap maybe of, uh, like I used to think if I could run a marathon that I would, that I would never pick up again because, that discipline required to train and complete the marathon. I thought that would equal recovery to me if I could do that. And I did it, and I still continued to binge on crack cocaine. So,
Right.
then I guess I kind of realized that no matter, I could be in the greatest shape of my life and it still wouldn't, equal recovery for me.
Yeah, no, exactly. You totally hit the nail on the head. They're different things. So, you know, I need the martial arts in my life, but I also need to work a program, and I need to go to meetings. I need to sponsor people. I need to talk to my sponsor. I need to have friends in the fellowship and do things with them. Um, and the way, what happened to me, I was coasting along, doing my martial arts. I got up to 7 days a week because I do Hapkido Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I do jujitsu Tuesday, Thursday, and then on Saturday I do Hapkido open mat, and then on Sunday I'll do jujitsu and sometimes judo. And so like my days were really full with the martial arts. But what happened to me is this disease hit my family. So one of my sons, just got over, he just got, his life got taken over by drugs and alcohol. And we were trying to cope with it.
That must
Um,
have been just a nightmare feeling for you when that happened.
oh, it was horrendous, man. It was like my worst nightmare. It was like the worst possible thing that anybody can imagine is having their kid, like, the things that we put our parents through, but like my kid got hit hard. It wasn't like a gradual thing. It was like, it was just all of a sudden he was just in a world of hurt. And it was just, I got to a point, I hit another bottom, like in sobriety, where I didn't know how to deal with this, like I wasn't, because I wasn't working a strong enough program and because I wasn't close to the program. Like when my kid started struggling in the way that he was, and my older son had been struggling with mental health issues. So like both my kids got issues, and it just got like to a point where I was despairing and didn't know what to do. And I would pray every night not to wake up in the morning. I was praying to die in my sleep every night. And it was a horrendous place to be. And I literally felt like I was losing my mind. And so I did, um, I turned to the place that saved me before. I got back into the fellowship. I threw myself into the fellowship, into the arms of the fellowship, and started going to as many meetings as I could and talking to people, and like at every meeting sharing my problems, and then like having people come up to me after the meeting going like, dude, my son's the same way, or my daughter's the same way, because this stuff runs in families. This stuff runs in families, unfortunately. And you know, uh, my poor spouse is struggling with this. I mean, she comes from a family, dad, brother. I mean, it's difficult. It's just difficult for her, and she doesn't have a program. I've started going to Al-Anon. She's not interested in going to Al-Anon, but I found Al-Anon very helpful as well. And for me, um, it's a little bit of it's the same 12 steps, but their take on it, particularly the 4-step, is a little bit different. And so, they call us double winners, if we're both in a,
Right.
our own program and then an Al-Anon. So
Yeah.
yeah, no, so I threw myself back into 12-step programs maybe like 2.5, 3 years ago. And it's restored me to sanity. Like things continue to be difficult. This disease is no joke, and it's a life
Yeah.
and
Well, I
death
imagine
situation.
having a child in that would bring up that control issues and like feeling that powerlessness of
Hmm.
this child you love probably more than anything in the world, and suddenly you feel helpless to save him,
Yeah,
right?
right. Yeah, and Al-Anon, they talk about the 3 C's. You didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it. And And yeah, like I know, I know I'm powerless over my own disease, but especially when you've got a kid and you've spent like your whole life like telling him what to do and what not to do, and then all of a sudden like you just got no control over it at all. It's just, yeah, it's a tough spot. It's a tough spot.
Yeah.
Um, so one of the things that's been interesting about and one of the silver linings of this COVID thing is my uh, my sort of like worlds hadn't overlapped before, really. So I've got a group of friends from my martial arts world. Now they know, I don't drink, and uh, but they don't know that I'm in recovery. They don't know that I'm a member of a recovery fellowship, that I work 12 steps, and they wouldn't understand any of that. They're normies, and they have normie families. Like none of them have first person relationships or friendships or family members who are addicts or alcoholics. To them it's just kind of like this. They just don't get it. Um, and it, I mean, these guys love me. I mean, we're tight. We sweat together, we bleed together. We're good friends, and we spend time together. Socially, outside of training. But if I were to tell them like, hey, I'm an alcoholic and an addict, and I'm in a recovery program, they wouldn't know what to do with that. I mean, because they just, it's just different. And
Right.
so like I've never told them about my recovery life, and I've gotten a group of friends now who um, uh, who they know I do martial arts, but they've never, they're my recovery friends. I've got these two worlds. Well, some of the guys from my recovery life during this COVID thing, like we've been spending a lot more time together and seeing a lot more of each other, and we're starting like a little club of training. They're interested in the martial arts, and several of them live in Oxford houses, like recovery homes, and they're looking for sort of like outlets, and they're really interested in learning a little jujitsu. And so I started training with them a little bit, and then once we're able to really physically grope each other again, we're going to start like a little club, and like a little sober martial arts club. And
That's awesome.
once the facilities open back up, I'm going to um, volunteer. They have some programs in the area run by the county, and I'll volunteer to lead some classes with them, some self-defense classes or some basic jujitsu classes. So, yeah, my two worlds are sort of starting to overlap there, and I don't know that they would have if this COVID thing hadn't happened.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. Um, so spirituality and martial arts, I guess it's really not known, I mean, commonly as a spiritual practice. Like yoga, for example, would be, there's definitely some spirituality there, some meditation. So, is there, I guess, a crossroads with um, spirituality and martial arts?
Well, I think the short answer is yes. The long answer is it really depends on the martial art, and it really depends um, on what you're looking to get out of it. So some martial arts are explicitly spiritual. So like Aikido, for example. Aikido is a Japanese martial art founded by a guy named Morihei Ueshiba, who was a mystic. And the martial art has really very little to do with fighting or at this point. It's another descendant of Aiki Jiu-Jitsu, the same Aiki Jiu-Jitsu that Hapkido comes from. But really it's about uniting yourself, working towards world peace, uniting yourself with harmony, uniting yourself with other people. And his goal was to help people sort of find um, um, find spiritual fulfillment in this art explicitly. I think that's probably the most spiritual art. Obviously, styles of Chinese Kung Fu claim to come out of Buddhist temples, and many of them, that there are Buddhist styles of Chinese Kung Fu that are related to Buddhism. There are Taoist styles. The Do at the end of Judo or Taekwondo, it's the same word as Dao, which is the way or the path. So
Okay.
in the East, Buddhism and Taoism and Confucianism, they kind of like blend in a way that Western religions don't blend so much, and they've all influenced the development of a lot of these martial arts.
And some of the martial artists consider, or well, the ones from Asia maybe more so, that martial arts is a way of life. It's, it's not just a sport or a practice, it's a way of life, right? Would that be accurate?
Yeah, and that's where that Do comes from. It's the way or the path
yeah.
to enlightenment and self-betterment. And the guy who founded Judo, Kano, that was explicitly why he founded Judo, to make it a path or a way of life that helps people become better versions of themselves. Gichin Funakoshi, who founded Shotokan Karate, had a similar, very similar goal. Morihei Ueshiba, who founded Aikido, had a similar goal. These guys were all Japanese. Funakoshi was from Okinawa, but he taught in Japan. He brought karate to Japan from Okinawa. So these were very much Japanese ideas of Budo.
Is there any guiding philosophies or mantras or anything like that from the practices you've been involved in?
So in Hapkido, we meditate a little bit before class. So there is built-in meditation in class. There's also like breathing exercises that help you focus and meditate. But in terms and the philosophies, I mean, they don't directly translate to. There's some like weird mystical stuff, honestly, that he pulls, out of his ears sometimes. Like, he's talking about like the different elements, and these are like Chinese Kung Fu type things, even though he's Korean, but he's talking about like, the elements of like fire and wood and water and earth and, and how they interact. And, a lot of that stuff goes over my head, honestly. For me, for my spirituality, the way my spirituality manifests itself is I need to try to figure out what the next right thing is for me to do, which is a difficult chore for me, because I, left to my own devices, I'm definitely going to be, running on self-will. And so, and so my, my spiritual challenge is how to have, the strength and the, and the knowledge and the serenity and everything to do whatever the next right thing is to do, because I'm constantly faced with moral quandaries all day long, and I'll tell you, in sports, in combat sports or martial arts that are less explicitly spiritual, you find a lot of that, like in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in particular, when they call it rolling, like the sparring that they do, they call it rolling. So you're on the ground rolling around with another guy and he's trying to choke you, or you're trying to choke him, or you're trying to like break each other's, or, compromise each other's joints on the arm to get to the point where the arm's going to break. And so like when you're training, you're obviously not choking each other to death or actually breaking each other's arms or knees or anything like that. But you get up to the point where the other person's about, like if you weren't going to stop, you would choke him to death or break his arm, but then you just tap and you reset and you go again. And so you learn a huge amount about yourself and about your fears and about your limitations and about your relationship to life and death and courage, being put in those situations. And you learn a lot about your partner too, and you can tell a lot about like when you're sparring with somebody, whether you're doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or a different form of sparring, you can see like, you can see who's got like a steady spirit, or who's running on self-will or fear or has too much ego. You very quickly develop a sense for your own ego and other people's egos when you're in that close proximity with them. And it helps keep you humble. It helps keep you humble too, because you're never, unless you're some kind of freak, there's always going to be somebody who's better than you, so it's very
Wasn't it
difficult.
ultimately a battle with yourself rather than a battle with an opponent? Would that be, I mean, I've heard that said about it.
Yeah. Well, that's Funakoshi said that in one of his books, and I think Kano said that also. Yeah, so that's kind of like a typical thing to say about it. And it's definitely true. It's definitely true because you have to come to terms with, you tell a lot about a person when they're in that situation. Like, do they get mad when they lose? Are they jerks when they win? Are they looking to learn about what went wrong so they can do better next time? Or are they just going to be, sore losers? You can really, what you bring to the mat, gets amplified in that situation. And some people can't handle it. They can't handle like having somebody else impose their will on them like that. But if you can hang in there, it does help. Like I've seen guys get transformed from being really kind of egomaniacal cowards, but they hung in there long enough to where they kind of became humble. They emptied their cup and they became humble, and they became transformed. Now, I don't think they were members of our fellowship. I think they were just regular dudes, but regular dudes have character defects too, so I think it helps them. I've got the kind of character defects that I need to work 12 steps to deal with,
Yeah.
It's not enough for me to roll around on the ground choking people or trying not to get choked.
Right, I hear you. Okay. Wow. Well, it sounds like so martial arts, along with 12 steps, probably saved your life. Would that be true? True enough? Are 12 steps
Yeah, I
along
think
with
so.
martial arts? I'm not saying one is more powerful than the other, but the combination of these two things has addressed areas of your life that one alone couldn't address.
Yeah, for sure. For me, I've got to put sobriety first. I haven't always done that. My life's been poorer for it when I didn't. But martial arts certainly enrich and help bring balance to my life. So, if look, I've got buddies in the program who are like obese, I mean, they're really unhealthy because they're stuffing their damn face, and not getting any exercise, and I could be like that too. But the bottom line is like, I go to meetings and I get spiritually healthy. And I also do martial arts to help keep me physically healthy. And the two of them, help me keep mentally balanced and sane and keep my mind on track, So, I could stay sober just working a program, but I have a richer life because I work a program and I do martial arts. And I would recommend it for, I think it would be great for anybody who's got any sort of interest in it, who's in sobriety. In my opinion, I think it augments sobriety really well. I would love to see, like a sober jujitsu community out there, or sober karate community, or sober martial arts community. I think,
Awesome.
I think it would be terrific. And I think everybody could benefit from it. The other thing I want to say about martial arts is that, like, what I've seen, my observation is that people are wired different ways, like when it comes to fighting and that kind of stuff. Some people are naturally like to grab and like wrestle, and some people like to punch and kick. And you tend to be wired one way or another. Some people like both, but and then, you know, some people like the dancing around stuff and that they think it's really cool and the twirling, and other people don't have any patience for it at all. They want to like get down to the nitty gritty, you know, dirty, effective stuff. But martial arts is such a broad thing that depending on what you're looking for or what you're interested in, there's something out there for everybody, you know.
Right.
There's
So
really
many
something out there
different,
for
so
everybody.
many
Yeah.
different disciplines. Or I did Taekwondo for a while when I was in Korea, and I really enjoyed that while I was doing it. I didn't continue it, unfortunately, but I could definitely see how that would, it does help you focus and helps you feel good physically. Um, but I was drinking pretty heavily at that time, so it wasn't exactly a sobering practice for me. But um, yeah, I could definitely see how that would be helpful, though. So what is, like, you know, for those listening who might be thinking, maybe I will check out one of these studios. What's the cost involved in that? Is like a monthly dues you pay, or
So it can vary
no?
greatly. Uh, can you hear me okay? Can you
Yeah,
hear me
there was
okay?
a pause there in the internet connection, I think, for a second. I can hear
Yeah.
you.
Okay, good. Um, so many of the sort of like strip mall places will try to rope people into a 1-year contract. Um, my advice to people is to not do that right off the bat. You know, unless they happen to find a school that they absolutely are in love with. But even so, like I would go to a few classes, to several classes, just to make sure you're comfortable before you sign any sort of a contract. Um, Typically, you will find that in the Taekwondo world or the karate world and the strip malls, and I don't blame them for doing that. Because I mean that's how they keep the lights on. You know, you get a bunch of paying clients, and you make sure that you keep them coming month after month.
Or keep them paying anyway, even if they're not coming back, right?
Right, right, and that happens a lot. Like, you know, people will sign up, and then after 2 or 3 months, they drop out. You know, the gyms that do mixed martial arts like MMA or often gyms will offer MMA. They'll offer Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai. That's very, you know, there's probably more and more and more of those. A lot of those will let you do month to month. That seems to be a model that works fairly well for them. But my recommendation for anybody, before you sign up for anything, go take some classes.
And
A
a lot
lot
of
of
these places offer the free intro class or something like that, at least one free intro class sometimes.
yeah, free intro classes, and um, you know, you can just, even if you can't, even if you don't see an ad or anything, you can probably go in and ask the teacher, like, hey, can I get a free class? Can I sit in on a class? Can I watch a class? And most of the time they'll let you. The other thing is YMCA's and rec centers. I do my Japanese jiu-jitsu in a YMCA. I teach 1 night a week at the YMCA. And I got started in judo at the YMCA. So like YMCA's and rec centers. And for people like I have some guys who, some friends who, they're in like halfway houses and like recovery homes or whatever. They're in low income type situations, and the county actually allows them to take martial arts classes at the rec centers for virtually no fee. You know, because of their income situation, the fact they're trying to get back on their feet. You know, so rec centers that are run by counties or by cities will often offer deals to people who are trying to recover. You know, so you can probably get either no cost or very low cost classes in rec centers run by local governments.
Great, great. Yeah, that's a good resource to look into for sure. Do we lose them?
No, I'm here.
Okay. Just lost your video for a second there, I guess. Okay. Yeah, we're getting a little funny business on the Zoom connection here, but I think we're about close to wrapping it up here. Is there anything we didn't cover that you wanted to talk about that you had in mind?
No, I really appreciate you having me out. I'm you know, very, very passionate about martial arts. And, I could just talk about like martial arts history and like differences and stuff
Well, yeah,
literally for days,
yeah, I
you
can
know?
tell your stuff too. You know your history, the names and the practices and the all that, and that's fascinating stuff for sure.
I'm also really passionate about recovery too, and it's great to have an opportunity to talk about these two things together. I think it's just awesome, I love the idea that I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to do martial arts, and I wouldn't have been able to do it. I tried to do it before I got sober, and I couldn't. I just didn't have the discipline to stick with it, and sobriety allowed me to do martial arts, and both the martial arts and recovery have made my life possible, and enriched my life so much that I just anything I can do to like give back to those two activities and those communities, I'm happy to do. And I'll go back to it's funny, I haven't found it necessary to have a fight really.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about that actually, if you had a fight.
No, and I don't want to fight anybody today. I've had to like restrain some people who were sort of acting out and being belligerent, and I've used skills that I learned. I was able to restrain them effectively without anybody getting hurt. Getting really hurt, and that's good. But I haven't had to engage in a fight, and I haven't had the desire to. I think it was just misdirected energy. When I was out there, like it was just misdirected crazy energy, and my sickness. But getting on a mat and striving to be better at something with a partner who's doing the same thing. It's a great experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, and I think, and isn't one of the kind of the maybe philosophies of martial arts, it seems, is that you're not out looking for a fight, but you know how to defend yourself. So it's more of a self-defense than a aggressive, like I'm going to go out and kick some ass because I know jujitsu,
Right, right. Yeah, no, for sure. Especially in the traditional martial arts, like, guys who are really into MMA, and there's like a whole lot of testosterone and stuff that, they definitely, they are the human pit bulls, and they're not going to back down from a fight in a bar, for sure. But most traditional martial artists get that sort of take, but there's something also, there's a confidence that comes along with knowing that you can take care of yourself, and for people that also practice that, that have been exposed to real violence, when I was drinking and like engaging in violence, like any of that could have gone so wrong, but I was just mindless, I was just like, I wasn't even like registering what the consequences could have been, to me or to somebody else. Whereas now, like, I have a very real appreciation of, how fragile and delicate the human body is, and like how somebody could really get hurt in a terrible way, and I don't want any piece of that if I can help it, you know what I mean? But if it comes to me, I also feel fairly confident that I can, deal with whatever comes my way,
Right. And the body is so complex and so fascinating because there's certain points where if you hit with the right amount of force, it could be deadly. But at the same time, we're really strong and durable and amazingly built, right? So, but there are like these, and you probably learned them in your practices, places where you can basically knock someone out or paralyze them, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you read about it in the papers all the time, right? Like two guys getting a fight outside a bar. Some guy hits another guy. The guy falls down and hits his head on the curb, and he's dead.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just stuff happens. It's just you hit your head the wrong way on something, and you can be dead. You can be paralyzed. Like terrible things can happen. Yeah. I don't want any piece of that.
I hear you. All right, John. Well, it's been a great talk. Thanks for, staying up late. I know it's getting close to midnight in your time zone. So I do appreciate you doing that for us.
Thanks for having me out, Mike. I appreciate you, my friend. And it's good to see you as always.
Absolutely, man. All right. Well, take care of yourself, and We'll talk to you soon. Okay.
All right. Thanks, brother. Have a good night.
All right. Good night, John.
Bye.